Hi, back to Flipped. We were in the middle of one of Juliana's chapters, and her dog was having a problem with where he's allowed to, shall we say, go, which inspired her brothers to name their band Mystery Urinator. So, Champ became an outside dog, and he might have been our only pet ever if it hadn't been for my fifth grade science fair. Everyone around me had great project ideas, but I couldn't seem to come up with one. Then our teacher, Mrs. Brubeck, took me aside and told me about a friend of hers who had chickens and how she could get me a fertilized egg for my project. But I don't know anything about hatching eggs, I told her. She smiled and put her arm around my shoulders. You don't have to be an immediate expert on everything, Julie. The idea here is to learn something a lot of you could listen to and learn from. But what if it dies? Then it dies. Document your work scientifically, and you'll still get an A if that's what you're worried about. An A? Being responsible for the death of a baby chick. That's what I was worried about. Suddenly, there was real appeal in building a volcano, or making a neoprene whatever, or demonstrating the various scientific applications of great ratios. But the ball was in motion, and Mrs. Brubeck would have no more discussion about it. She pulled The Beginner's Guide to Raising Chickens from her bookshelf and said, "Read the section on artificial incubation and set yourself up tonight. I'll get you an egg tomorrow." But don't worry so much, Julie. We do this every year, and it's always one of the best projects at the fair. But but she was gone, off to put an end to some other students' battle with indecision. That night I was more worried than ever. I had read the chapter on incubation at least 4 times and was still confused about where to start. I didn't happen to have an old aquarium lying around. We didn't happen to have an incubation thermometer. Would a deep fry model work? I was supposed to control humidity too, or horrible things would happen to the chick. Too dry and the chick couldn't peck out. Too wet and it would die of mushy chick disease. Mushy chick disease? My mother, being the sensible person that she is, told me to tell Mrs. Brubeck that I simply wouldn't be hatching a chick. "Have you considered growing beans?" she asked me. My father, however, understood that you can't refuse to do your teacher's assignment, and he promised to help. An incubator's not difficult to build. We'll make one after dinner. How my father knows exactly where things are in our garage is one of the wonders of the universe. How he knew about incubators, however, was revealed to me while we were drilling a 1-inch hole in an old scrap of plexiglass. I raised a duck from an egg when I was in high school. Science fair project. A duck? Yes, but the principle is the same for all poultry. Keep the temperature constant and the humidity right. Turn the egg several times a day, and in a few weeks, you'll have yourself a little peeper. He handed me a light bulb and an extension cord with a socket attached. "Fasten this through the hole in the plexiglass. I'll find some thermometers." "Some? We need more than one?" "We have to make you a hygrometer." "A hygrometer?" "To check the humidity inside the incubator. It's just a thermometer with wet gauze around the bulb." "No mushy chick disease?" "Precisely." By the next afternoon I had not one, but 6 chicken eggs incubating at a cozy 102 degrees Fahrenheit. "They don't all make it, Julie," Mrs. Brubeck told me. "Hope for one. The record's 3. The grades is in the documentation. Be a scientist. Good luck." And with that, she was off. Documentation? Of what? I had to turn the eggs 3 times a day and regulate the temperature and humidity. But aside from that, what was there to do? That night, my father came out to the garage with a cardboard tube and a flashlight. He taped the two together so that the light beam was forced straight out of the tube. "Let me show you how to candle an egg," he said. Then he switched off the garage light. I'd seen a section on candling eggs in Mrs. Brubeck's book, but I hadn't really read that yet. Why do they call it that? And why do you do it? People used candles to do this before they had incandescent lighting. He held an egg up to the cardboard tube. The light lets you see through the shell so that you can watch the embryo develop. Then you can cull the weak ones if necessary. Kill them? Cull them. Remove the ones that don't develop properly. But wouldn't that also kill them? He looked at me. Leaving an egg you should cull might have disastrous results on the healthy ones. Why? Wouldn't it just not hatch? He went back to lighting up the egg. It might explode and contaminate the other eggs with bacteria. Explode? Between mushy chick disease, exploding eggs, and culling, this project was turning out to be the worst. Then my father said, "Look here, Juliana, you can see the embryo." He held the flashlight and egg so that I could see it. I looked inside and he said, "See the dark spot there in the middle with all the veins leading to it? The thing that looks like a bean? That's it." Suddenly, it felt real. This egg was alive. I quickly checked the rest of the group. There were little bean babies in all of them. Surely they had to live. Surely they would all make it. Dad, can I take the incubator inside? It might get too cold out here at night, don't you think? I was going to suggest the same thing. Why don't you prop the door open and I'll carry it for you? For the next 2 weeks, I was completely consumed with the growing of chicks. I labeled the eggs A, B, C, D, E, and F, but before long, they had names too. Abby, Bonnie, Clyde, Dexter, Eunice, and Florence. Every day I weighed them, handled them, and turned them. I even thought it might be good for them to hear some clucking, so for a while I did that too. But clucking is tiring. It was much easier to hum around my quiet little flock, so I did that instead. Soon I was humming without even thinking about it, because when I was around my eggs, I was happy. I read The Beginner's Guide to Raising Chickens cover to cover twice. For my project, I drew diagrams of the various stages of an embryo's development. I made a giant chicken poster. I graphed the daily fluctuations in temperature and humidity, and I made a line chart documenting the weight loss of each egg. On the outside, eggs were boring, but I knew what was happening on the inside. Then, 2 days before the science fair, I was candling Bonnie when I noticed something. I called my dad into my room and said, "Look, Dad, look at this. Is that the heart beating?" He studied it for a moment, then smiled and said, "Let me get your mother." So the three of us crowded around and watched Bonnie's heart beat. And even my mother had to admit that it was absolutely amazing. Clyde was the first to pip. And of course, he did it right before I had to leave for school. His little beak cracked through, and while I held my breath and waited, he rested and rested. Finally, his beak poked through again, but almost right away, he rested again. How could I go to school and just leave him this way? What if he needed my help? Surely this was a valid reason to stay home, at least for a little while. My father tried to reassure me that hatching out could take all day and that there would be plenty of action left after school, but I'd have none of that. Oh, no, no, no. I wanted to see Abby and Bonnie and Clyde and Dexter and Eunice and Florence come into the world, every single one of them. I can't miss the hatch, not even a second of it. So take it to school with you, my mother said. Mrs. Brubeck shouldn't mind. After all, this was her idea. Sometimes it pays to have a sensible mother. I'd just set up for the science fair early. That's what I would do. I packed up my entire operation, posters, charts, and all, and got a ride to school from my mom. Mrs. Brubeck didn't mind a bit. She was so busy helping kids with their projects that I got to spend nearly the entire day with the hatch. Clyde and Bonnie were the first ones out. It was disappointing at first because they just lay there all wet and matted, looking exhausted and ugly. But by the time Abby and Dexter broke out, Bonnie and Clyde were fluffing up, looking for action. The last two took forever, but Mrs. Brubeck insisted that I leave them alone, and that worked out pretty great because they hatched out during the fair that night. My whole family came, and even though Matt and Mike only watched for about 2 minutes before they took off to look at some other demonstration, my mom and dad stuck around for the whole thing. Mom even picked Bonnie up and nuzzled her. That night, after it was all over and I was packing up to go home, Mom asked, "So, do these go back to Mrs. Brubeck now?" "Do what go back to Mrs. Brubeck?" I asked her. "The chicks, Julie. You're not planning to raise chickens, are you?" To be honest, I hadn't thought beyond the hatch. My focus had been strictly on bringing them into the world, but she was right. Here they were, 6 fluffy little adorable chicks, each of which had a name and, I could already tell, its own unique personality. I I don't know, I stammered. "I'll ask Mrs. Brubeck." I tracked down Mrs. Brubeck, but I was praying that she didn't want me to give them back to her friend. After all, I'd hatched them. I'd named them. I had saved them from mushy chick disease. These little peepers were mine. To my relief and my mother's horror, Mrs. Brubeck said they were indeed mine, all mine. "Have fun," she said, then zipped off to help Heidi dismantle her exhibit on Bernelli's Law. Mom was quiet the whole way home, and I could tell she wanted chickens like she wanted a tractor and a goat. "Please, Mom," I whispered as we parked at the curb. "Please." She covered her face. "Where are we going to raise chickens, Julie? Where?" "In the backyard." I didn't know what else to suggest. "What about Champ?" "They'll get along, Mom. I'll teach him, I promise." My dad said softly, "They are pretty self-sufficient, Trina." But then the boys piped up with, "Champ will," I have to edit, "pee on them. He'll pay on them to death, Mom." And all of a sudden they were on a roll. "Yeah, but you won't even notice because they're yellow already." Whoa, yellow already. Cool name. That could work, but wait, people might think we mean our bellies. Oh yeah, forget that. Yeah, just let them kill all the chicks. My brothers looked at each other with enormous eyes and started up all over again. "Kill the chicks!" "That's it. Get it? You mean like we're chick killers or like we'll kill the chicks?" Dad turned around and said, "Out, both of you. Get out. Go find a name elsewhere." I'm going to stop here for today. I'll see you tomorrow. Hey, click mark as done so that I know if you're watching. See you tomorrow.